We have a session today called Building Effective Data Products in the AI Era. I feel like being here at the conference and meeting a lot of people in the data industry, AI and also data as a product has definitely been a core theme of what everyone is talking about. So I guess where we can start off from is how we define data products today.
That's a good place to start, actually. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think many people have their own definitions. Some people even call data sets as data products because it does have different dimensions or fields. But I would say a lot of the times that you would want to have data to have a real refreshed amount of details baked in if you want to call it as a product. But also, the concept of data product really is focused on applying software development and product development into managing and creating data. So Solmaz, maybe if you can tell me more about what we would call data product or data as a product. If you can explain, that would be great.
So as you said, there are many different definitions that people mean by data products. I think the one that we're going to focus on today here are the products when the entirety of the feature or capability in the product is driven by data. So some examples are if you're, for example, offering real-time fraud detection in your product or recommender systems, like every time we log into Netflix and we see the set of shows it has recommended to us. And then with the rise of generative AI, all these products that are powered by large language models, those are all bundled into data products.
For sure. In a way, I think these data products are now embedded in apps, websites, chatbots, or even within cars and appliances that we use everywhere now. So what do you think are the most important nuances about building data products? What are some of the thoughts on perhaps like the teams or org structures that's required to building good data products?
So when we start thinking about data products, as you said, they are everywhere. They're used in all the apps we have, in products we use daily. So what is very important is to think about the product experience that you're trying to create. Thinking about the user perspective, the problem they're trying to solve, and the experience you're trying to create with data. And that matters because it impacts the kind of solution you choose. To give you an example, many companies start by trying to go through transactions and detect if any of them are fraudulent. For that model to work, for that problem to be a good one, you have to think about, OK, how fast does the user expect the response? How are they going to deal with the recommendation of something being fraud or not? And thinking about this specific problem and the user experience impacts what kind of models or designs you're going to put into production. Then the second aspect is that these models and these data products are often optimizing for something. And deciding what your product experience is going to be dictates and impacts what you're going to optimize for. So again, to remain with the same example, if we think of a case of fraud, one scenario is to say that we are so particular about reducing the number of fraudulent orders that we are OK that sometimes by mistake we'll call something that's not fraudulent, so we claim it a false positive, and that would reduce the number of losses we have. So that's one way to optimize the model. The other is to say, no, we actually want to have more sales. So we are OK taking a risk on some orders that are likely to be fraud, but we're not sure, and we're going to optimize for more sales. So just knowing what you're trying to optimize in product experience impacts what you optimize the model for. And then the other aspect is just thinking about uncertainty and probabilistic things is very hard. It doesn't come to us naturally. We always want a definite answer. And product experience also want to be deterministic. So as you're building these data products, it's really good to think about when the model is not sure, when the data is not enough, how is the product going to work, and how are we going to convey this lack of certainty to user without confusing them. So when we can't make a prediction on something, maybe we can give them guidance on the next steps to take to verify that answer. And then, when you start building data products, you often are looking across the organization, seeing what data you have available. It often comes from different teams, different parts of your product. So it's very important to have some guarantee and some definition on the inputs and outputs that you have. And recently, there's been a lot of talk about this concept of data contracts. So some sort of guarantee, some notion that, I expect this kind of input, I expect this kind of output. And it's really good to define these things, because when you're building the product, you're working day in, day out on it, and you remember all the data points you're using, how you have defined them. But then as time goes by, someone else might take on this product, or you might want to maintain it, and you just forget. So having this sort of artifact in the organization really helps in keeping these data products up to date.
Is there an example of data products that you think of from the times when you were at Shopify? Because there must have been a lot.
Yeah, so the first one we actually did was the sort of order fraud detection, where we were trying to detect fraudulent orders that were placed on the platform. And this was like 8 years ago. So at the time, there weren't that many ML ops tools, or it was novel to have something that runs real time in product. And one of the key things we learned early on is that, for example, for this product to actually work, it has to work at the speed of checkout, which for a commerce platform is very important. It has to be resilient, like checkout. So those concerns went into what kind of data we use, what kind of models we use. Another product that I think is really interesting was we decided as a company to give cash advances to merchants to help them grow their business. So basically giving real money to people who have their own stores on Shopify to help them become successful. And we would only, they would remit money back only when they made sales. So it was very important to be able to predict the sales with a high accuracy and the right velocity. So that's the sort of model part, right? But the product experience also is that are these offers going to be reviewed by anyone? How is the experience of someone getting an offer and understanding it? And a lot of it was also being able to communicate the guardrails around the model to like finance and other departments in the company, because it was real money that we were giving. So it goes a lot into having good product metrics that you can explain and then you can monitor. And then the data contracts, I think everyone goes through this experience of building something, relying on a piece of data, and then one day noticing it's unavailable. So data contracts allow us to sort of avoid these scenarios. But yeah, there were scenarios, for example, where using something from the payments team, and as part of their workflow, they might change the data set. And it's good to have these mechanisms in place to detect them.
That's
and
awesome.
We did a lot of like recommender systems, and then now a lot of like the company is doing a lot of generative AI. But I think the fundamentals of data products and thinking about the experience remain the same.
That's awesome, because it almost also feels like data products has been used not just to enhance the core part of Shopify platform, but also have expanded the types of product and also services that Shopify can extend to merchants and consumers. So
Yeah, exactly. Like the capital product I talked about has done over $3 billion, so it's not something small. But it was something that with machine learning and data, we were able to scale really quickly instead of having teams of hedge fund analysts working on how much money to extend to someone.
Amazing. So how are the teams and roles, do you feel like it gets structured or should be structured when it comes to building data products? Because it's generally, I guess, or should they be different from building traditional products?
I think data products are newer. We have, as a community, as the world, we've had less experience in building them. So compared to traditional products, where you often have engineering, design, and product to build something, in data products, the data team takes a driver's seat. So they understand the data. They often are the ones who are designing the models. But as we said, they have to care about products. So they do have to have really good understanding and really high care for the product experience and work closer with the PM, product manager. On the engineering side also, I think the sort of the work that data or data engineers do has a lot of commonalities with just general engineering practices. And I think in many cases, it's actually useful to adopt those practices to ensure like better resiliency, better quality code. So I find in that area also they overlap a lot with engineering. So I found like in my previous work and in companies I advise, for the first few data products, it makes sense to say, okay, we're going to have all of these people with different skills together and try to figure out who is best suited to get this product to actually production. Because sometimes if you also define sort of specialties very early on, you have a lot of broken windows that nobody is owning to fix. So I think when you're building data products early on, you kind of have to swim out of the swim lanes and focus on getting that product out.
For sure. And I think definitely there's the hybrid way of managing data as well as stakeholders that are being involved in data products.
Yeah, stakeholders is actually a very important point of data products because, as I said, we often are sort of sharing this with someone else or someone else is like guiding the overall project. So there are different ways. Some people are fans of centralized data teams that sort of like work with groups of stakeholders and then they come back to a central team. And then there's also the distributed one. And both models can work. Most of my experience has been with distributed teams where they all sort of reported to me as head of data, but they were embedded in different areas. And that ensured two things. Having a sort of central team for a new craft like data ensures that you can put standards, tools that help for everyone and ensure the excellence of craft of data. But also being embedded means that your data team is working closely with business or product teams and has context and is part of the day-to-day workflow. So that also increases the chances of ideas that the data team comes up with or notices becoming actual real products because they are in the workflow of the team.
Makes sense. Cool. So in this era of AI, how do you envision the role of builders of data product changing? What are some of the new skill sets or expertise you feel like is starting to become a lot more necessary today?
I think the role of everyone building around data, as you said, is changing. We are expecting product managers to sort of understand what can be done with data, how they can leverage data. And then we're also expecting data people to evangelize for these opportunities to really leverage data and also educate the teams on the potential risks that come with AI and with probabilistic models. Things around data privacy, for example, as a company, what data are you legally and ethically allowed to use, or regulations around AI and ownership. For example, many of us would end up using APIs and services powered by large companies or large enterprise, and understanding how does using that impact the ownership over IP of something you build on top of that. There's also with deep learning that has had breakthrough advances over the past few years. There's this concept of models coming out sort of as a black box, or not being able to say which features, what factors were important for getting to a decision. And I think data people are the ones that data practitioners have really good understanding of these risks, and it's good if they play that role of educating others. Another point is that there's a lot of tools and infrastructure becoming available for data. So I find data practitioners also end up having to be on top of all of those things. So knowing the research that's coming out and the tools and techniques to be able to quickly adapt and bring those to their organization.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think that whole nuance of data, context of data, and also understanding the quality of data is becoming so much more important now when the data is going to be flowing into different models and use cases.
Yeah, exactly. Like the data products are everywhere. We're probably using them in every single app that we use. So having better understanding of the quality and the nuances becomes very important. As you said, data is not, we always say, okay, we want the answer from the data. What does the data say? But the reality is that there's a lot of nuances. So being able to understand that and explain that also falls onto the data people. And I find like if you contrast that with previous times when there were not as many data products, As a data practitioner, you would build something, you would present it to your stakeholders, and you were always sort of like living in close vicinity of the data work you had done. But when you make data products, these things are going to scale and live on their own in the world. So it's really good to have that understanding of nuances and sort of build the understanding into the product so that people know what they're dealing with.
Cool. So speaking of understanding the nuances of data and data products, can you provide some insights into the role of data discovery and how it affects the development of data products? How could having better data discovery contribute to the overall success of a data product?
Just when you look around you and you talk to anyone in the field, the volume of data that we are generating over the past few years has grown rapidly. Before, we used to have only data from the databases, but now everything emits events. You track cookies, you track user behavior across web and mobile and everything. So there is a wealth of data available. So that's great. But then, when there's so much data, being able to know what data is available to you in an organization in a systematic way becomes really important. And I find a good discovery platform that automatically is able to give you information about where the data is coming from, how it's produced, what's its lineage, who's using it, that also scales with your company and with your data as you change becomes really important. In fact, it becomes like a cornerstone of being able to get value out of data. So companies go through this path of saying, like, we are not collecting enough data. So then they start collecting a lot of data. And then they say, we want to access this data. So they get access to the data. And then they go back to the first step and they say, we can't find anything we need. So a discovery platform really helps solve this problem. The other aspect of a good discovery platform is the fact that it allows everyone to find the data they need. And when it comes to data products, it allows someone who's thinking about a problem to go in there and see what data is available about that. So in a sense, for building data products, a good discovery platform is like a multiplier. It allows people who are just consuming data and not producing still have a good understanding to leverage data. But I feel kind of like I'm not the one who's supposed to be talking about discovery. You have founded a company around discovery, so I'd love to hear what's your take on it.
Sure.
The impact you have seen from the product.
Yeah, actually, I also wanted to ask because Shopify ended up building their own discovery product because of these needs, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, at SelectStar, we do see a lot of companies needing a solution for data discovery. Primarily, one is this explosion of data, but also democratization of data and allowing everyone in the organization to be more data-driven, being able to utilize data in their day-to-day decision-making really can only be enabled if they have a place that they can find and understand their data from. So I feel like this aspect of empowering everyone to be able to understand and also work with data is a key point. And our job at SelectStar really is to help everyone to get a full context of where this data came from, who's using this inside the company, so that if they have a question, they can also ask about it, getting examples of SQL queries or reports and dashboards that's been already created. And I think that's been kind of like the main part that helps everyone in the organization to be on the same page. Some of our customers, like Block, that owns Square and Afterpay, they have more than millions of data sets that we help organize, and it's supporting 7,000 employees, including business users as well as data consumers, or like data scientists or data engineers, to kind of look at it as and use it as their single source of truth data portal. So that's something that I'm personally very proud of and very excited about. Another part that I feel like this data context and discovery of data really brings value to the organization is around data management. when you have so much data, how do you make sure that you are continuously making the most impactful, most useful, most important data to be available for the right stakeholders?
Right.
And understanding the usage patterns as well as areas of improvement within the data management and data governance perspective is a new area and use cases that we are starting to see that a lot of our customers use SelectStar for. So.
That's fantastic. Yeah, as you said, we built our own solution at the time at Shopify, but part of it because tools like SelectStar were not available at the time. So I think that's actually the learning there is to, now there's a lot of good tools out there for different aspects of the data pipelines. So I think if I would go back in time and similar tools were available, I would never ask the team to build it, because the other aspect is your team is thinking about data discovery day in, day out, focused on that, versus internal team in a company has a million other things to solve as well. So I think that's why products like SelectStar grow so fast and are able to add these features as the needs of users come up.
Yeah, it's really exciting to be kind of that forefront of continuing to iterate and build out our platform with so many customers that are utilizing it, because a lot of them are right now implementing data democratization, more modern, hybrid way of data governance. So yeah, it's really exciting times right now.
Just one more feature that you guys have that I love is the fact that you have this example SQL, because there's this stream of self-serve analytics. We've all heard it. We've all tried to create an organization. I think to some extent it's possible if you can also educate users on how to use a data set. Just making a data set available to them is not going to be enough. And I found when we were able to sort of share sample queries or sample reports that were vetted and reviewed with the teams, it made because you want to discover data to do something with it, right? And giving guidance on how you do that something goes a long way when you have a large organization.
Yeah, I mean, when we first started, we wanted to first extract a lot of the value out of these SQL query logs, because that really shows what people are doing with the data and how they are querying the data. So by showing which other tables you can join it with, and what is the join condition looks like, which are the types of queries that are really running a lot, that gives you a lot of insights about how your data is modeled as well as how data is consumed. And now one of the latest feature we've released is by understanding these select queries as well as kind of how the tables compose. So a lot of the create or update or merge queries that either it is considered as data definition languages or modification languages. Now we are starting to generate data documentation for our customers. Yeah. So a lot of the times the customers come to us with their data warehouse. It's completely empty, but they're only just table and column names. Yeah. But because we can generate this context based on their SQL queries as well as any other applications that are connected to SelectStar, this can give them a lot more richer documentation that they can share with other citizen data scientists or business analysts or just business stakeholders that want to learn more about the data. So I think this it's a pretty interesting to think about how everything kind of comes down to the SQL queries.
Yeah, exactly. And also I think SQL queries is great because you can see how people are using it. But I think also realistically, writing documentation for data is not something that people wake up every day to do. So the more you can take that and automate it is great. And again, if you go back to sort of building data products, you're going to use features from all over your warehouse, right? If you had to go and talk to all those people who have created them to understand them better, just no product would come out in time. So this is going to help with the AI products a lot as well.
Yeah, so one of the models that we use also is data lineage. Right. Because as you see the data pipeline transforming or piping data from one place to another, you can also see how the data can be applied into other places, or how the context can be replicated in other places. This is a lot of companies or a lot of our customers use data lineage to understand the impact of any changes that's happening on the raw data source, or downstream, what's going to happen with the downstream dashboards. But one area that we also use data lineage for is to propagate documentation and also PII classification tags. Yeah, because you can trace through where the data has landed. We can also mark any of the tags. If you have tagged one field as PII, we can apply it everywhere else that the data is present.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah.
Awesome. So I guess, how do you think organizations should approach standardization and governance? Lots of data, more data products being built, and also different tools and technologies being available. How should they think about that, and also standardizing a lot of this governance part?
Standardization is so important when you have large company, you have lots of data. To me, it's defining sort of the rules and regulations of how you're handling data, how you're defining your data. And then governance allows you to sort of enforce this unified definitions and ensure it's the same across the company. And some of the areas that are really key to have these standards in place is when it comes, for example, to privacy, when it comes to how you handle personally identifiable information, or PII. And the beauty of standards and governance is that it allows you to have that unified best practice across the company. So, you mentioned the PII and the tags that need to be applied. Imagine if every team had to decide on their own how they're going to treat PII, and then two teams that had like sort of similar data were trying to work together, but each of them was using a different standard. And then governance allows you to sort of like have this sort of blanket understanding and apply it to different parts of the organization, and ensure that, if someone is picking a data set, they have some understanding. So standards come in not just privacy, but that's like very important in the era of AI, to make sure you're using the right data. The other aspect is standards allow you to set expectations on data sets. So you can classify different data sets in the organization as like tier 1, tier 2, tier N, and define characteristics. So for example, you might be using a tier 1 data set, thinking that the data here is accurate, it's been reconciled with different sources, and it's going to be fresh up to an hour. And if it's not fresh up to an hour, there's someone on call that's going to deal with it. So that expectation is already built into the standards, and you can, by accessing through your discovery or different tools, you can see that that standard exists. And those agreements are really important, because imagine now if another team needs this data, they're not going to spend hours or weeks trying to recreate the same thing. And having these definitions clear is very important, because sometimes when you start building a data warehouse, you start with very high standards, right? You're putting all this effort, you're defining your models. So you make statements like quality is everyone's job, or every data set is tier 1. Those things actually don't scale. It's good to define, and not every data set needs to have the same quality, same constraints. So having those standards and being able to apply them and communicate them becomes really important. The other part is like, using a data set that someone else has created, you want to make sure that you understand the nuances that comes with it, the guarantees that comes with it. So those are the aspects of standardization that really pay off. Because when you start to do these things, you're like, well, it's a lot of effort. Is it actually really worth it to do it? And then by the time you've had like 1, 2, 3 data products, or just lots of stakeholders trying to access data, these things start to really pay off.
Yeah, I think this is definitely one of the topics that's starting to come out more, because it's garbage in, garbage out.
Yes.
You want to make sure that your data quality is being actually monitored, and also like the data models or the consumers of data understands where the data is really coming from, how it can be utilized. So I guess we also do see a lot of customers building their what they would call data mart,
Right.
where there's bronze, silver, gold tables with certain SLAs and the level of abstraction already baked in.
Right.
Yeah, I guess like just for the audience, how would you describe SLA of data and how, like, I don't know if there's like an example you can give. I think that would be helpful.
So SLA, service level agreement, right? So for example, if you're using, for example, let's go to the commerce platforms. So the data set around orders is such a key component in a commerce platform because you want to understand how many orders are placed, where they're being placed from, what kind of products are people buying. And a lot of teams would have similar questions. So if you define a tier 1 data set that uses data from orders and transactions and products and creates this sort of beautiful fact table that is allowed to tell you when an order is placed, what are the characteristics, that's great. However, if you came back and said, okay, I can create this beautiful data set for you, but you would only see every order 24 to 48 hours afterwards, and we're not really sure if it's 24 or 48 hours, and sometimes it might break, and we don't know how we would know to let you know. Like, probably you're not going to use that as a user, because you're like, well, I need to have some control, some guarantee of what's going into my product. So the SLA for this table, for example, was 24 hours. It was a very wide table, so it needed different sources of data. What that meant was that basically every time you queried this data, it was fresh up to 24 hours ago. The other aspect was like there was a lot of checks and balances to make sure this data is correct. And errors happen, issues happen. So when those happen, there would be like a data disruption or a way to inform users that this has happened. So we took this SLA really seriously. But there's also other data sets that have tighter SLA, like data coming from Kafka events. Usually you can fetch it very quickly within minutes. And then sometimes also there are data sets that just by definition have a longer, longer SLA. So think about monthly, month-end revenue. You close the month at the end of calendar month, so it's going to be fresh as of the as of the last month end, right? Yep. And then there's no need to change that. So I think that's the other part when you're trying to define SLAs. When you ask people first, they say, I want everything all the time, real time. And then you go through like the issues of getting that data ready, and then you start to realize, what's my actual need? Like, do I actually need this real time? What's a decision I can't make or impact I can't have with this data if it's a day late or if it's an hour late? So I think that's where you need to be careful defining these SLAs in a large company.
Right. I think there is this trade-off that you may have to make, especially because even though we can collect as much data as possible and store them as much as possible, in order for us to get or make decisions in time, you don't necessarily need to compute from raw data source all the time. Yes. And I think that's where this data modeling, data contracts, as well as the visibility of, or the way that you can cut and slice the data really comes in.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right. Like, it is always a trade-off. And the longer you wait, the surer you are of the data, but also sometimes the value of data exponentially drops the longer you wait. So that's why it's very context dependent. What do you want to do with this data to decide the best SLA?
Awesome. So yeah, I guess we're already on our last question of the day. So in the context of building data products, what opportunities are you most excited about with especially this expansion of machine learning and AI tools?
What I'm personally super excited about is how using latest, greatest models that researchers are publishing is becoming so easy and so commoditized for everyone to take these things to build products that solve your unique problem. Previously, building something like this and training it was only in the hands of large enterprise. But now, not only there's APIs available, there's really good open source models coming out that allow people to do work. That was impossible. Just as an example, when I was doing my first master's degree, this is 2006, we were trying to do deep learning models for predicting cancer in a cell. And the largest network we could train really was 2 layers. And it took me, like, most of the time for my thesis was actually writing packages that would do these calculations. And now you can do that part of the work probably in a week at most. And that's great because, as someone in a different field, as someone doing research, you can actually spend your time and energy on where you are best suited to do that work, right? Like if you're a biologist or a researcher in a different field, you can actually easier build things that solve problems. The other part is, as the tools for machine learning in general and for data infrastructure have advanced, accessing data, understanding data, all of these have become easier. So sometimes when I'm advising companies, I see how easy it is to go from no infrastructure to a well-designed data warehouse, good discovery platform where you can find the data in a matter of a few months. This used to be like a multi-year journey. So I think that's very exciting because I personally think the value of data comes when you leverage it to build better experiences, to define guardrails around these experiences. And that comes only when a lot of people can build with data products, not just a selected few. So to me, this notion of it is very exciting.
For sure. Yeah, I think even for the larger companies, for them to, a lot of them to start open sourcing their LLM models after massive amount of data training that they've gone through is really starting to open up more opportunities for everyone to be able to build data products at a much more higher quality level.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's a really exciting movement. I mean, for me, the whole with this rise of LLM and AI, there is, I feel like, a new look into data management and data quality that's coming through. I think just a lot of companies have been collecting data and storing lots and lots of data without even knowing what it is, what they can do about it. And now they want to start feeding into some model and make their products, services better. And I think in order to do so, being able to lens through how the data can be managed and be available for different aspect of the product, I think is it's just kind of as an industry and how data ecosystem as they are moving, as we are all moving forward with it. This is a really great time to be in.
Oh yeah, I agree. It's a great time to be in. I think also so much of the world's data was unstructured, and then now all of that can become useful. You still have to clean it and understand it, but yeah, it's going to be really exciting. I can't wait to see 3 years from now, 5 years from now, how different the products we use day to day are because of the changes happening now.
Awesome. Well, I guess with that, we can wrap it up here. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me.